Welcome to November on Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. I'm so glad you're here. Can you believe it's November already? I'm thrilled you're here to join us with some of our favorite authors and historians to explore the wonderful worlds of history. Sit back and enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. I am thrilled to be here with one of my, you all know this, one of my favorite historians and authors, one of my favorite people, someone I've been able to meet a few times. It's just so exciting to have Tracy Borman with us. Thank you for joining us, Tracy.
Caroline, you know it's a huge pleasure for me. I love chatting with you. I always do. It's even better in person, of course, but hey, this is great too. We can see each other. I can see that wonderful backdrop. And thank you for displaying my books.
Yes, yes.
I'm rather taken by the Henry VIII teddy bear as well. That looks
yes,
pretty cool.
I do. I do have some other little treats of mine, but of course, your books. And, we're going to jump right in because we're timing this with the US release of your latest book, which is behind me here, and I'll just grab it. The Stolen Crown. Now, I want to start with, you've written many books about Elizabeth, and I have some of those behind me, Elizabeth's Women and The Private Lives of the Tudors, and of course, my favorite, Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I. And now you have taken a dive into a different time, which is the end of Elizabeth's life and the transition to James VI, who becomes James I. So I know we've chatted about this, but please share with everyone what inspired you to do a deep dive into this period of time, the transition, the succession, what could have been a real crisis and was sort of managed in an interesting way that we didn't realize for hundreds of years.
Absolutely. That was a great way of putting it. Well, this book surprised me. I didn't plan to write this book. It was entirely inspired by a new discovery made by researchers at the British Library, who, suffice to say, found out that this apparently smooth transition from Tudors to Stuarts was far from that. It was a piece of fiction that we've been told for 400 plus years. And the account that historians, including myself, have relied upon, written by William Camden, contemporary of Elizabeth, her first biographer, and his account was The Annals of Elizabeth, published in 2 volumes after her death. And it tells us very clearly that almost with her last breath, Elizabeth said, "I will have none but the King of Scots to succeed me." Now, she had resisted pressure to name her heir throughout her 44-year reign. And I think very rightly so, because she knew you name an heir, you create a rival. But on her deathbed, so Camden tells us, she finally settled it on one of the frontrunners, James Stuart, James VI of Scotland. But what the British Library found out is that actually looking at the original of Camden's manuscript, he didn't originally say that at all. He actually wrote that when Elizabeth died, she didn't name anybody. And then he was forced, when James was on the throne and when James was losing his grip on that throne, he forced Camden to go back and falsify history. And so the manuscript was never published, before James. And then James saw this PR opportunity and he said, no, I want you to make a few revisions. And there were some significant ones, most notably the succession. And then Camden was made by James. James is breathing down his neck to go back and literally put words in the dead Queen's mouth that named him and made him much more acceptable to the people of England. Because I should say as well, England and Scotland were bitter rivals, enemies, always at war for centuries. They saw each other as foreign countries. Today we're part of a United Kingdom, of course, but not the case then. So James had his work cut out anyway, winning popularity in England. But his style of monarchy just clashed with that of the late Queen. he soon became deeply unpopular. You know, he was witch hunting and Catholic hunting, and he spent a lot of time with his male favorites, and it was all a bit much for the people of England. So James desperately needed this popularity boost. So he thought, I know, I'll make it look like Elizabeth really wanted me as King of England. So yeah, poor old Camden had no choice in the matter, and he was made to falsify history. And that's what this discovery was. And I just honestly, jaw hit the floor moment when I read this news flash from the British Library. And, you know, even though I was halfway through writing a different book altogether, I stopped work on that one, talked to my publisher, and luckily they kind of got it and said, yeah, you need to write what now it became the Stolen Crown.
Well, it's a great story. I mean, just that is such a great story that there's new information and new discovery, fake news. I mean, all the
Yes.
kinds of things that we
Oh,
think we invented today, but in fact,
yes.
we did not invent. But this PR and literal laying, because they are layering pieces of paper onto the original manuscript, but also these layers of meaning and of our understanding of Elizabeth. Now, I find it really interesting that during the reign of her half siblings, Edward VI and Mary I, there are quite a few women, and there's a woman in Elizabeth's time, some of these same women who could have been heir to the different Tudors along the way, despite the relentless efforts of Henry VIII to make sure no woman would ever come to the throne. Why were there so many women? We see James prevail, but there were women who were being considered for Elizabeth. You know, Edward chooses a woman, but there were many women and no men for Edward to choose when he wrote the device for the succession, and Mary also. So why were there so many women and these powerful related to the Tudors and bloodline
Yeah.
possibilities?
Well, you're right, and a lot of that was just accidental. In that there's a real issue with having male heirs, isn't there, in the Tudor period? People seem to struggle with it, all except Henry VII, the first Tudor king, who, you know, he's got heirs and spares, and it's not a problem. But of course, we know Henry VIII definitely struggles to have a male heir, goes through three wives before he has one, and so a lot of that is just happenstance, you know, just accident, that there are many female claimants, but comparatively few men. I mean, there are men around. I'd point to Henry Hastings, Earl of Huntingdon, but he's actually not Tudor. He has Plantagenet blood in his veins. So he's from the kind of powerful Pole family, Lady Margaret Pole and all the rest of it. Um, but otherwise, yeah, there's just all these women, the Grey sisters, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, Lady Margaret Douglas, Henry VIII's niece. So I kind of think that's great as well, in that it's like accidentally an era of female power, really. And there's no small irony in the fact that, you know, in this age where everyone thinks queens are a terrible idea and that it ought to be a king on the throne, all of Elizabeth's deadliest rivals are women. Now, I found a kind of way to simplify it for the most part, because it gets complicated when you look at how they're related. Basically, most of the claimants, almost all of the claimants, are either related to Henry VIII's elder sister, Margaret, who married into the Scottish royal family, or his younger sister, Mary, whose descendants included the Grey sisters. So there are a few exceptions to that, but for the most part, it's those two princesses, Margaret and Mary, and that's where all of these various women stake their claim from.
From the two women. So it's really interesting,
Yes,
which is just kind of great to think about, I
isn't
think.
it? Isn't it? I enjoy that fact.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a fun fact. So I want to say that the book starts with, and I love this right from the start. I have so many things I could read, but I'm just going to read Elizabeth's words, and it's from early on in her reign, just from 1561. So she's only been on the throne a short time, and she says, "When I am dead, they shall succeed that have the most right." I
Yes.
love that.
I mean,
She's
yeah.
always a bit cagey about who will succeed her. I mean, it's an early question, you know, De Feria says everything depends upon the husband this woman may take. And of
Yeah,
course, that husband is expected to then result in the birth of a son. I mean, that's what everybody's hoping for,
totally.
including William Cecil, who was a big Elizabeth supporter, but even he is pretty desperate for her to have a son and
Yeah.
make things get better. Um, do you think so? She doesn't get married, she doesn't have children, and she refuses to name an heir.
Mhm.
Is that a strategy on her part? Is it
Yeah.
successful? Let's talk about how her thinking there.
Yeah, totally strategic on her part. But yeah, I mean, how destabilizing must it have been for her subjects? Because we must remember that Elizabeth followed three very short reigning monarchs, Edward, Lady Jane Grey, Mary. They only managed 11 years between them. And then you've got Elizabeth, the last of Henry VIII's children. And nobody thinks she's going to last any longer because why would they? They don't know that she's going to, against the odds, survive 44 years. And she tells her first parliament, I will live and die a virgin. So it's like, what? As if the whole thing couldn't be more unstable. It's pure statecraft on Elizabeth's part, her refusal to name her heir. And she was very upfront about her reason. And that's because she'd lived what it was like to be a kind of not quite named heir, but an obvious heir. During her sister Mary's reign, it was very clear that if Mary didn't have children, then it really had to be Elizabeth. Even though Mary wasn't that keen on that idea, she was Catholic, Elizabeth was Protestant. But it was obvious that's where things were heading. And what it meant was that Elizabeth, as the sort of heir presumptive, if you like, she was constantly the subject of plots and rebellions against her sister, all aimed at assassinating Mary, putting Elizabeth on the throne. And Elizabeth said to people, she was very upfront. She said, look, this is why I'm not going to name anybody. The minute I name a successor, I create a rival. And she stood by that. And she was under some pressure during her reign, intense pressure about this more than anything,
Yeah.
obviously pressure to marry. But, and William Cecil in particular is like just tearing his hair out. You've got to name your successor. And particularly as there was a very near miss in terms of Elizabeth's existence, because just in 1562, she'd only been queen barely 4 years when she contracts smallpox when staying at Hampton Court. And this just terrified everybody. The Privy Council call an urgent meeting trying to decide who's going to come to the throne. And it scares the living daylights out of everybody. And from that day forward, the question of the succession never goes away. It's only matched by Elizabeth's determination not to resolve it because she doesn't want to create that rival.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I wonder too, she was so savvy and so observant, and having a baby boy turned out to be the wrong thing for Mary, Queen of Scots. I mean, it that
Yeah,
created an heir, and that was preferable. The baby boy ended up being preferable to an adult woman when it
yeah,
came time in Scotland to force Mary's abdication. So it does seem a potential problem to have a
yeah.
clear heir.
Absolutely. Mary did it a totally different way. She went down the conventional path of, marrying not once, but three times. And of course, she had that son, as you say, the future James VI. But actually, that worked against her, if anything. I mean, it didn't help that Mary made some bad decisions. She was obviously the situation in Scotland was much more volatile than in England. But yeah, quite early on, there was a move to oust Mary and to replace her with her, months old son. He was still a baby boy, was better than an adult female. So actually, yeah, even though there was this quest for a male heir, that could have happened to Elizabeth very easily. Because, as soon as you have another potential person who might be on the throne, particularly if they're male, then all eyes go to them. And, that's why actually, because I've written, about the whole history of the monarchy, you often see that fathers and sons don't get on very well in the history of the monarchy because immediately everyone looks to the son. Oh, what's he going to be like? Well, maybe he could come to the throne a bit sooner. So yeah, having a son is not the be all and end all. And so very sensible of Elizabeth just not to go there.
Right. And there were some pushes for her to go there, particularly with Mary, Queen of Scots herself. So Mary is forced to abdicate, escapes from Scots prison, comes to England as Elizabeth's guest for all those years. And there's a thought to maybe name Mary as her heir. That's certainly what Mary's looking for. What does
Yeah.
that represent? And why is that such a problem?
So their relationship gets off to a terrible start. Obviously, it's going to be a huge relationship for Elizabeth and for Mary, indeed. The day after Elizabeth comes to the throne, Mary stakes her claim. Day after, she starts calling herself Queen of England. That's not going to get the relationship off to a good start, really. But to be fair to Mary, she had a quite strong, well, she had a very strong blood claim. So she was descended from that elder sister, Margaret, who married into the Scottish royal family. But Henry VIII had actually banned the Stuarts from ever inheriting his throne. He'd passed acts about it. He'd reiterated it in his last will and testament, and that still stood in Elizabeth's reign. And we tend to gloss over that. I think that's no accident. James made us gloss over that in later years. He was technically illegal as a king of England. That Henry VIII had passed laws against it. And so was therefore Mary Queen of Scots. But I think there was a feeling that, blood is thicker than water. It's all about the strongest blood claim. And Mary actually did have the strongest blood claim. She was descended from the elder sister, age counts in the succession. And what made her appealing to half of Elizabeth's subjects, but not the other half, she was Catholic. And so all those who saw Elizabeth as a heretic queen, they wanted the prospect of a Catholic queen to follow Elizabeth. But yeah, I love that you picked out that quote, because that is Elizabeth at her ambiguous best. Just saying, when I am dead, they shall succeed. She doesn't even use a gender. They shall succeed who has the most right. It's like that doesn't answer anything. It's like you're not saying, okay, so who does have the most right? She never answers that.
Right.
She consistently refuses to name Mary. She's very polite to her. She exchanges letters. She, hosts numerous Scottish ambassadors, and she always seems to come within a hair's breadth of saying, okay, I'm going to name, but never does. And she uses the same tactic with James once he's King of Scots, just dangling that carrot. Oh, maybe I'll name you my heir if you behave. And yeah, but then never quite coming good on that promise.
Right. So I know that gets complicated when Mary, Queen of Scots, is found guilty of treason and is executed, because here's James, it's his mother. How do you make that okay? And interestingly, even though James is the son, he's not Catholic, he's Protestant, and there's a lot of pressure to keep him in power in Scotland rather than a Catholic coming in. So there's a lot going on there.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, by the time Mary is executed in 1587, Elizabeth and James have been corresponding for many years. In fact, fun fact, I hope, they corresponded for longer than any two sovereigns in the early modern period. They wrote more letters to each other than any other two sovereigns, and it lasted 30 years, their correspondence. James wrote his first letter to Elizabeth when he was 6 years old. And it's all very, very friendly for the most part. And clearly these two are making an effort to improve Anglo-Scottish relations, which haven't been great, as I mentioned, for centuries. But each has a different motive in that Elizabeth is considering James clearly as a successor. So she's kind of testing him out, finding out his theories on kingship and trying to help him. She doesn't help anybody else. She tries to help James by giving him advice about, well, this is how it works in England. Of course, James doesn't listen to any of it because he believes, like his countryman John Knox, that it's monstrous for a woman to bear rule. So, what does Elizabeth know? But he's polite about it. But he really, really, really wants Elizabeth to name him her heir. And then you get this kind of bomb just thrown into the mix, which is the fact that Elizabeth has ordered Mary's execution. And how are they going to cope with that and restore friendly relations? Because Scotland is now baying for Elizabeth's blood and actually calling on James to go to war with England to avenge his mother's death. And Elizabeth, on the other hand, is pleading with James. She didn't mean to do it. She calls it that miserable accident, oops, axe slipped or whatever it is. But no, she said, I never ordered it. It was a thing I never ordered, the execution of your mother. Can I say she did have a point? She did sign the execution warrant. She never gave the order for it to be issued. And she really went for that big time when trying to apologize to James. So what's going to happen to this relationship they've worked so hard on? Well, actually, James doesn't really think much of his late mother at all. He was months old when she fled to England. He was raised by men hostile to Mary, so he has quite a negative view of her. And so he doesn't actually want to rock the boat. So they go through this whole kind of dance in their letters, Elizabeth profusely apologizing for, accidentally chopping your mum's head off. And James, very graciously saying, okay, well, water under the bridge. Let's just never mention this again. And neither of them do. Neither of them mention the fact that Elizabeth has killed James's mother. So it's like the elephant in the room for the duration of their relationship going forward.
And I think that from that, there has been, as you say, manipulated by some people, this idea that, okay, don't come to war against me for killing your mother, and you can be the next monarch of England. I mean, it seems
Yes,
like that's a little bit of a
absolutely. It's a trade-off. It's a trade-off completely. And Elizabeth uses that. It's a very handy hold that she has over James to persuade him to do all sorts of things. For example, help me repel the Armada. If you don't give refuge to the Spanish ships, and just help me out here, and you will wink wink benefit further down the line. And it works because James thinks, well, I can't risk not doing it because really want that throne actually. So yeah.
okay. So that's just kind of percolating along. But there are some other people, and I want to mention Arabella Stewart because she often gets completely left out of this discussion. And she's a fascinating figure in the reign of Elizabeth and in the reign of James, but at this time in particular, as a possible heir, because Elizabeth promotes her in a way for a period of time.
Yeah. And I know I shouldn't have favorites when it comes to the contenders for Elizabeth's throne, but Arbella is totally mine because what a dramatic story. You can honestly, it reads like fiction. And I would recommend Sarah Gristwood has written an amazing biography of Arbella about England's lost queen. It's fantastic. Um, and so Arbella, she also has, of course, Stuart blood, as her name suggests, descended from the elder sister Margaret, but she was born on English soil. So that gives her the edge over James for all of these xenophobic English people who don't want a Scot on their throne. So she has two quite formidable grandmothers, Lady Margaret Douglas, who is Mary Queen of Scots' former mother-in-law, and she's the niece of Henry VIII, and Bess of Hardwicke, wonderful figure from the Elizabethan age. And these two matriarchs kind of conspire to marry their kids to each other to create an heir for the throne. Well, that and they succeed. Those kids, by the way, die pretty soon after Arbella's birth, so she's orphaned, and then she's raised by Bess of Hardwicke, her maternal grandmother. But Bess raises Arbella in a really unfortunate way because, on the one hand, she makes her keenly aware of her royal blood and status. So, all the people at at Hardwicke House have to go down on bended knee serving Arbella. And on the other, she denies Arbella any freedom of action. It's kind of like Queen Victoria in the Kensington system, She's not allowed to make decisions. She has to sleep in her grandmother's bedchamber until she's in her 20s. So that kind of contradictory form of child rearing results in a young woman who is, on the one hand, very haughty and arrogant because she knows she's royal, and on the other, fatally naive because she hasn't been able to experience the world or, really understand what it takes to survive in this cutthroat world of Elizabeth's court. And it soon comes to the fore when she makes her first appearance in Elizabeth's court, the Armada year. In fact, she joins in the celebrations of the defeat of the Armada. She's 13 years old. And within about 5 minutes of arriving at court, she upsets just about everybody because, she's used to being, absolutely worshipped at Hardwicke. And she demands precedence over every other woman at court apart from Elizabeth. And she really hammers home her royal blood. And she goes even one step further by flirting with one of Elizabeth's great favourites, the Earl of Essex. Well, that doesn't go down well with the Queen. And she banishes Arbella from court for the next 3 years. So, and it's just this constant picture with Arbella of self-destruction. You have her grandmother, Bess, really trying to shape her into a future queen. And Arbella just shooting herself in the foot time and time again, conspiring secret marriages against the Queen's wishes. And ultimately, poor Arbella ends up in the Tower, but not during Elizabeth's reign. It's actually into James's reign. But she really is James's closest competitor. And so he keeps her close when he's king. Keep your friends close, enemies closer. But she defies him by making a secret marriage to another claimant to the English throne, William Seymour, the grandson of Lady Catherine Grey. They're both thrown into the Tower by James. But I think it really shows how popular Arbella is in England that they escape. Now, I can tell you, because I work at the Tower, in 1,000 years, there's only been 11 escapees. So it's hard to break out of the Tower. I think they had help. The plan was Arbella and her husband would be rowed in separate boats across the Channel to safety in Flanders. Arbella got to the rendezvous point first in the boat, and she made the fateful decision to wait for her husband. And while she was waiting, the English authorities caught up with her, arrested her, took her back to the Tower at the same time as her husband's boat appeared, and he made it safely over to Flanders, whereas Arbella would never leave the Tower. She kind of went on hunger strike. It seems she almost starved herself to death. And tragically, she died. And it's, such a tale of if only with Arbella, because actually, she could have been a great queen, but I think Bess of Hardwicke actually has to take quite a lot of the blame for how things turned out.
Yes, and the fact that she was born in England could have, catapulted her over James in terms of the law at the time, because those acts had not been repealed. So that was still sort of on the books.
Absolutely so. And she really did have a very, very strong claim, although, technically illegal because she's a Stuart and Henry had banned those. But it really mattered to people that she'd been born in England. And it certainly got around the problem. There was a law from Edward III's time, so going way back, that said aliens, by which he meant people not born in England, could never inherit the English throne. So that actually put James out of the picture, but it meant Arbella could, because she had been born in England. So it gave her the edge very definitely. But now I'm always surprised by how few people have heard of her.
Right.
And she was a big player in this race for Elizabeth's throne.
Yes, but you don't hear much.
No.
So as this is happening and Elizabeth's getting closer, no one's allowed to talk about her death. So I hate to say it, but as she's getting closer to that time, everything's, kind of coming to a head. Do you think ultimately she got the successor she wanted? Now we know that Camden was forced, with James, and we'll talk in a minute about James was, not that popular and it didn't go that well. But did Elizabeth, do you think, want him? Was he finally her choice?
I think for Elizabeth, James was far from ideal because she knew his views on female rulers. She probably knew that he'd been disregarding her advice, and he was also, of course, the son of her greatest rival.
Yeah.
So it must have stuck in her throat, and that's probably why she never said the words. But I think she saw him as the best of a bad lot. It's kind of, she recognized through blood alone, he had the strongest claim. And she also recognized that for the people of England, blood mattered. Depressingly as well, gender mattered. And he was male. And that's what the people of England wanted. In fact, one of Elizabeth's government, while she was still alive, said that the English people are wishing no more queens. They'd had three in succession. And so I think Elizabeth, she was the ultimate pragmatist. I think she thought, probably James has the best chance of success. So it probably worked out as she kind of hoped. But I think it's quite telling that she was never able to bring herself to just say the words. So that says to me that she was never entirely sure that he was the right candidate, but her actions spoke louder than her words. As I said, she didn't help any of the other candidates in the way she tried to help James.
Well, and you're right. The fact that he didn't take the help or take the advice isn't on her, and certainly he would have done better. He came down and was completely ill prepared and not interested in learning how to
Yeah,
work with the English government. So we see the Tudors had a pretty tenuous hold or claim to the throne initially. Henry VII, pretty tenuous claim. They last into the next century. And, the Stuarts do keep the throne, but there's several really serious introductions with the execution of Charles I and then James II sort of being forced. So the Stuart men, at least, really struggled to keep the throne. And so what do you think made the Tudors more effective in staying in power? Because the Stuarts had
yeah,
to keep taking power back.
absolutely. So it's fascinating reading Elizabeth's letters to James because they do read like a manual on English monarchy. And one of my favorite pieces of advice that she gave James that I think he and his fellow Stuart monarchs, you're right, the men should have listened to, was play the king, put on a show, uphold the ceremonies of monarchy. And that we still see that today. It's an important part of monarchy today is that tradition, that ceremony. But James was like, no, not going to do that. Don't see the point. His son Charles I as well lived mostly in private, didn't really like putting on a show. And Elizabeth had also counseled James work with Parliament. And that was crucial because in Scotland, Parliament was more of a rubber stamping institution. The king ruled the roost, and Parliament kind of passed whatever he wanted to pass. Whereas in England, it was much more of a partnership, and the Tudors had done that quite successfully. James again didn't listen, and Charles I certainly didn't listen. And of course, just dissolved Parliament when it didn't do what he wanted until Parliament rose up against him and it plunged the country into civil war and ultimately resulted in the execution of Charles I. So this lie, this lie that started the Stuart dynasty would actually have devastating consequences and carrying forward and forward because, yes, the Stuarts were eventually restored. And Charles II, he was pretty popular. But James II definitely wasn't. He was ousted from the throne. And then you just get a real shift. And it's all about parliamentary power. And that's when, with William and Mary, it becomes really a constitutional monarchy. And the monarchy only has the appearance of power, not the reality of it. It's tantalizing to look at the what ifs. If there hadn't been this lie, and we should mention Robert Cecil because he was a kingmaker, William Cecil's son, most powerful member of Elizabeth's government. He really helped James to the throne. I think he, like Elizabeth, saw that James was probably the best one, really, despite the shortcomings, and he paved the way. But if that hadn't happened, and if somebody else had taken the throne, it's just tantalizing to think, how would the history of the monarchy have worked out? And would we still have one? It's so fascinating.
So if it hadn't been James at the point in 1603, who else could it have been? Because James was not, he was sure he wanted it, but he knew he had to do some work to get, he was not passive, just waiting for her to die. He was actively pursuing that throne.
He
Who
was
was
actively, yeah.
who was a challenger to him? Who did he feel threatened by?
So we've already talked about Arbella, and he
Yeah.
definitely felt threatened by her. And in fact, the Venetian ambassador at the very close of Elizabeth's reign kind of did this analysis for his master, all about the lead contenders, and he basically said it's two-horse race. It's Arbella and James.
Okay.
But I would argue it was a three-horse race, but the third horse was less willing. But legally speaking, when Elizabeth breathed her last, we should have had a King Edward VII. So we would have had Edward Seymour, who was the eldest son of Lady Catherine Grey. He would have been next in line, according to the terms of Henry's will, the acts of succession. It would have been Edward Seymour. So 300 years earlier than we did get an Edward VII. After Queen Victoria died, we'd have had an Edward VII. So if the law had been followed. But Edward Seymour, if he did make moves for the crown, that's been lost to us. He's quite a shadowy figure. We know that he certainly contested. Elizabeth tried to claim that his parents' marriage had been illegal and not before proper witnesses, so Edward was illegitimate. He certainly contested that, but we don't know how far he pushed it. But purely by law alone, we should have had King Edward.
That's really interesting because you don't hear much about him. The Grey sisters, certainly Elizabeth did not like the Grey sisters,
No.
but Edward, that's right. Legally, if you just went with the laws on the books,
Yeah,
because Henry VIII's directions were all of his children and their heirs, and then to his sister Mary's children and their heirs, and that would have been
exactly.
Edward.
Exactly. So that would have been Henry VIII's choice. He'd have said, no, case closed. It goes to the Greys, and therefore, they marry into the Seymours. So it would have been Catherine Grey's son, Edward. So interesting, isn't it? But although Elizabeth always hated the Grey sisters, like really hated the Grey sisters, it had claimed that Catherine's marriage, as I said, was unlawful. Her sons were bastards. She imprisoned her. And it said that on her deathbed, although this is from Camden, so pinch of salt time, she said that when Edward Seymour's name was mentioned, Camden said that Elizabeth ranted, "I will have no rascal on my throne." And she meant, I don't want Edward Seymour. But was that Jacobean propaganda as well? Was that
Yeah.
another rewrite? It's very possible, I think.
Yes. So why do you think Elizabeth hated the Grey sisters so much? Because there were other people who were possible heirs that
Yeah.
she at least put up with, but those two, she
Yeah, they
really,
really got to her. And it's interesting. She seemed set against them from the start in a way that her sister Mary had never been. She kind of honored them and had them as ladies in waiting. And Elizabeth, continued them at her court, but she really could not stand Catherine Grey in particular and was just deeply suspicious of her. I think she saw how the Spanish kind of courted Catherine, because Catherine was of ambiguous religion, I would say. She was Protestant when somebody wanted her to be, and Catholic when somebody else wanted her to be. So I think Elizabeth saw how she was positioning herself, and she was young and she was beautiful, and perhaps a little bit of jealousy set in as well with Elizabeth. And then, of course, Catherine proved Elizabeth right because she married in secret to a fellow blood claimant, Edward Seymour, didn't ask Elizabeth's permission. And Elizabeth saw that is a play for my throne.
yes.
Whether or not it was, she saw that, and that was it then. She didn't trust poor Mary Grey, who really didn't do anything wrong. She tarred her with the same brush as her sister Catherine.
And then Catherine had a son. So
Yes. Yes. She was already pregnant by the time Elizabeth found out about the secret marriage. And then I love the fact, she and her husband are imprisoned in the Tower, supposed to be kept separate. But then a year later, another son is born in the Tower. Two of the Yeoman warders stand as godfathers. It's all very cozy. Elizabeth was furious, sent Catherine to a separate prison. She never saw her husband again. But so often in this story, royal blood is far more of a curse than a blessing.
well, that's a really good way to think about it because it was certainly that way for many of these people that we see that may have been contenders or not. And the
Yes.
crown itself, as Shakespeare might say, uneasy lies the head. And that was
Yes.
certainly the case too.
Exactly, totally. I mean, writing this book, I thought, my God, I would go nowhere near the crown if it was me. It's like, who wants it anyway? I mean, Elizabeth gave that amazing speech towards the end of her reign, the Golden Speech in 1601, when she's basically saying, it looks better than it is to wear a crown. It's
Mhm.
kind of, it's not all that. It's really quite challenging, and it's a heavy crown. It's a heavy
Yes.
burden, and yet people couldn't help themselves. They were forever pitching for it.
Well, and James, I think he found it much less easy than he anticipated because he really,
Totally.
yeah,
I mean, really, be careful what you wish for. And he absolutely wished for the crown of England. And it just wasn't all that he thought it was going to be. Because, England was it was a much richer country. It was more powerful than Scotland. He was an ambitious man. But it was really hard being King of England. And he didn't like that Parliament didn't just do his bidding. And in particular, when it came to uniting his kingdoms, he thought that was going to be easy. It's like, first Parliament of his reign. Okay, well, let's have a formal union between England and Scotland. And he got a shock because neither England nor Scotland wanted it. And in fact, it was only Queen Anne, more than 100 years later, who achieved that formal union, creating the United Kingdom. And so I think, yeah, James was very, very quickly disillusioned.
yes, but he kept fighting for it. So,
He
and that's
kept
why we
fighting.
have Camden and all
Yes,
of those.
yes, he kept going on, and of course, yeah, it sort of worked out. And I do think the later Stuarts set aside James II. They made much more of a success of it, and I'm particularly fond of Queen Anne. I think she did
Yes,
a
yes. So we should say that's one of the good outcomes of this because a lot of
definitely,
really great things happen in her reign that she doesn't really get much credit for. She's
exactly,
often paid a visit.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, let's speak up for another female queen,
Yes, let's keep
female
them
monarch.
coming.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that you were working on one thing and had to put it aside. Are
Oh
you back?
yes.
And do you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, I'm pleased to say I'm now editing that other book. I finished it in the summer. I'm now editing it, and that's coming out. Well, in the UK, it's coming out in April.
Wow.
And I hope it will be of interest to your listeners. Needless to say, I would love to come back, please, talk to
Yes,
you about
yes,
it.
yes.
It's called The House of Boleyn, and it's a novel. It's the rise and fall of the Boleyns, and it's entirely set at Hever Castle. The beautiful Kent residence, and it's kind of like, I don't know if Downton Abbey. I know it's across the pond, but it's like Downton Abbey meets the Boleyns. It's kind of upstairs,
Oh,
downstairs,
wow.
and it tells the story of the rise and fall, um, and all of the kind of family dynamics, and of course Anne is center stage, but there are many other interesting Boleyns in that. So yeah, I'm not quite sure of the US release date. It is coming out in the US.
Okay.
It's usually a couple of months after, but certainly it's April in the UK.
Okay. Well, definitely. We can just book that immediately
Thank
because
you.
that sounds so fun. And I love the idea just thinking about because in that household in Heber, when everything was going on, I would think the servants would be um, fascinating.
Oh my goodness, the things that they saw and heard. Can you imagine? And so
Yeah.
it's been really interesting for me because I do as much research for my fiction books
Right.
as for my nonfiction. And I've done an awful lot of research into, the servants, the household at Hever,
Yes.
as well as characters like one of my favorite to emerge was Lady Margaret Butler, who married William Boleyn, Thomas Boleyn's father. And she was quite a formidable matriarch. If you do watch Downton, she's the kind of Lady Grantham figure
Oh,
of the whole novel. She's amazing and a real role model for her granddaughter Anne. Absolutely.
oh, that's fascinating because certainly Anne Boleyn had a lot of influences. So it's good to see some of the ones we don't always get to see. So that's
Ex-
really exciting.
Exactly. It was such a thrill writing this book because, of course, I've spent time with the Boleyns, but it gave me a really different perspective. And just, yeah, it's, as I say, Anne is definitely up there, but it's all the interplay of the other
Hmm.
family members. And
Hmm.
yeah, fascinating. I absolutely loved working on that. And I'm
Oh,
very pleased,
good.
because that book had to be patient and wait for me
Yes.
to then write The Stolen Crown. But I was able to take it back up
Oh,
quite
good.
easily, all those threads that I'd left behind, and I loved it.
Oh, good. Oh, that's wonderful to hear. So we'll look forward to that too. And all of your social media, I'm thinking, is still the same. So we'll have that for everybody.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Tracy, for spending all this time with us. I can't get enough of you. So thank you so much.
It's been an absolute delight, as I knew it would be. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll have all the information on where you can get the book, the US publication, of course, where you can get it in the UK, all those kinds of things. So thank you for joining us for Royals, Rebels, and Romantics, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. If you could please leave us a rating, share with a friend, it makes all the difference. And a special thank you to my wonderful patrons who make all of this magic possible. I hope to see you again soon here on the podcast, where we look at all of the ways that history shows us what's possible. Thank you.